All right, so I'm back with another classical over the board analysis. And this game, a very interesting game that I played back in 2018, the Virginia Open. In the first round, actually, I was paired against none other than Zhou Jianchao, a 2700 USCF and very strong grandmaster. He's a top 20 Chinese grandmaster, and he is a very strong player. He's played some very interesting games against some of the top players in the world, including Ding Liren, as well as many others. And this is the highest rated player that I'd ever played, so I was quite interested in seeing how he would take care of business. But I was also quite intimidated and a little bit nervous about playing someone as strong as him. So I started the game off with D4. My rating was 2063 USCF at the time, and he was 2702. So I start the game off with D4, and we enter a Nimzo-Indian after bishop to B4, pinning the knight. And then after E3, he just castles, and I go bishop D3, just putting the bishop on an active square, and he goes C5, striking at my center. So I just go knight F3 here, and he takes, and I take, and then he goes D5. So this is a pretty common procedure for black to take and then to play d5, and his intentions will become very clear soon. So I castle, and after I castle, he goes d takes c4, and after bishop takes c4, it becomes clear what he's doing. So he's given me this isolated queen pawn. It's isolated because there are no pawns beside it. And generally, when you have an isolated pawn, or an isolated queen pawn in this case, you need to rely on piece activity, because if black is able to trade all the pieces down into some sort of endgame, this pawn will become a weakness. So generally, I need to look for piece activity, ways to activate my pieces, and potentially at some point, if allowed, look for some sort of way to trade off this pawn. So in this case, it would be looking for some sort of d5 pawn break to try and get rid of this weak pawn. Okay, this has all been seen before. There are over 3,000 games in this position. He goes b6, and I go bishop g5. This has all been seen before. Bishop b7, queen e2, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, knight bd7. This is all pretty standard stuff, and as you can see, black has a very solid position. And in my position, I need to basically figure out what I'm going to do with these pawns. So this is a hanging pawn structure. So you've got these two pawns. I no longer have this isolated queen pawn. However, these pawns can also be weak because if they're able to get blockaded, they can also become weaknesses if everything gets traded off, as you'll see in the game. He's able to trade off pieces and then slowly just take advantage of these weak pawns, and I'm not able to mobilize them in a way that's going to benefit my position. So I go bishop d3, he goes queen c7. This has all been seen before. I go c4. The main move here is rook a to c1, but c4 has been played about 45 times and is the second most common move, and c4 seems to be a reasonable move, mobilizing one of these hanging pawns. So he goes knight g4, which is the main move, and I'm not particularly well versed in this theory. It's hard to know all the theory of every line, especially when you're 14 moves deep, but that's why he's a 2700 grandmaster and I'm not. So I go bishop e4, which is the best move, just trading off these bishops. And while it does make sense to trade off these bishops because his bishop is much better than mine, arguably, it does lead to a position where we are trading pieces, and these pawns could potentially become a weakness. So he plays bishop takes e4, queen takes e4. Note that there's no time to play queen takes c4 here because his knight would hang. So he plays knight back to f6. And he's got a very, very solid position here. So his plan is really just going to be to put his rooks on the D and C files opposite these pawns and really just apply a lot of pressure to them and try and take the advantage. So I go queen back to e2. This has still all been played before. There are about 12 games in the database, um, scoring fairly equally for both sides. And he goes rook ac8, rook ac1, and he goes h6. And I go bishop h4 here. I've got some ideas of playing bishop g3. I don't really want to take his knight. That wouldn't really benefit me in any way. It would be trading more pieces, and then he would just take back with the knight and play rook d8, and he would have a comfortable position. So I go bishop h4. My main plan is simply to go bishop g3 at some point and reposition the bishop. And he goes b5 here. And this is the first move out of theory. However, this is a very reasonable move, and the engine seems to validate it. And while it does look like, oh, white might be getting a pass pawn here if he plays c5, it's not necessarily so clear how I'm going to continue to push those pawns, especially since black can blockade this pawn structure. Let's say I play c5 here. It wouldn't be very difficult for black to simply blockade these pawns to some degree, whether play knight d5 at some point or queen c6 or queen b7. It's really not easy to continue to mobilize these pawns, and it really it's tough for white because these pawns will become a weakness at some point. So I go bishop g3, I insert this move first, and he goes queen c6, and then I go knight to e5. And this is my first misstep of the game, and it probably, I should probably just go c5 here, and things are probably pretty equal, but, it's hard to say what I'm going to be doing in this position because the pawns, if I have a pawn on d4 and c5, those pawns would be very well blockaded. And I think, he's slowly going to start to get behind those pawns, and he's going to start to apply a lot of pressure, and it might be a slow burn. Knight e5 is a mistake, though, however, because after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, it becomes clear after knight d7. I guess the engine does think that b takes c4 is better, but I think it does make some sense to not allow me to take on f6. So I think knight d7 is a very reasonable move. And after c5, it's really clear here after we trade pieces that my position is fairly tough here. And it could be argued that I should take on e5 with the d pawn so that this pawn is no longer here as a weakness. The problem is, if I take with the d pawn, then the c pawn becomes a weakness. So there's really no way to avoid having at least one weak pawn in my position. So I go queen takes e5, which if you let it think for a while, the engine does think is the best move, but both moves are kind of slightly better for black, or reasonably better for black, like a 0.6 or 0.7 advantage. So he just goes rook fd8, and it becomes clear that he definitely has an advantage here because my pawns are completely blockaded, and now he's got his rooks right where he wants them. And at some point he's going to play something like rook d5 or something like that, and these pawns are completely blockaded, and he can just continue to apply pressure to them. So I go rook to c3, which, looking back on it, probably is not the best move. I think I had some intentions of either going rook f to c1, or maybe I had some aggressive intentions of going rook to g3. However, after queen to d5, it becomes, which is not a mistake, by the way. The engine says it is, but it is not. It becomes very clear that any sort of idea with rook to g3 simply is just not going to happen because he's got everything covered. So if I go rook g3, he's just going to trade queens and then have a much better rook endgame. So if you can envision that, if I go rook g3 here, he's just going to play either queen takes e5 or queen takes d4, and it's just going to be not ideal. So something like queen takes e5, d takes e5, either rook takes c5. Rook takes c5 is probably the most straightforward. Just rook takes c5, and then I've got this weakness. My rook really isn't doing anything over here useful, so I probably have to swing it over here. But at the end of the day, I've got weaknesses, and his rooks are already much more active than mine, and I still have a back rank issue So I would have to waste another tempo at some point to make a square for my king. So this is just going to be a painful rook endgame, and I'm sure he could absolutely grind me in that position, being that he's a 2700 GM. So we end up trading queens, and I go rook d1, and it becomes clear that this is tough. And he goes e5, which is a very strong move, and then after rook to a3, he finds another strong move, rook c takes c5, and I'm beginning to understand that I am lost here. After rook takes a7, rook takes d4. His pieces are simply too active. His rooks are simply too active. And another issue is that I have this back rank issue where all three of these pawns are in front of my king, and I do not have a flight square for my king. So this can be taken advantage of, and I really didn't think about it enough. So I go rook e1. He goes rook c2, activating his rook, and he also has rook d2 ideas coming, putting the two rooks on the 7th, where these rooks are just going to become monsters. So this position is quite painful for me. And I try rook b7, but he just goes b4, which seems almost unnecessary. And he could probably just go rook d2 or rook f4 right away. However, he just goes b4 just to prove to me that I have absolutely nothing in this position. I can't even take on e5 because I've got this back rank threat. So I try rook a1, and then I realize that I can't even defend that pawn. And he just plays rook takes a2 because I've got this back rank problem if I were to take. So I go rook b1, he goes rook b2, obviously I still can't take, and then I go rook f1, and then after rook d to d2, we're just a couple moves away from me resigning. He's simply got a dominant position here. I go rook to e7, and then he goes rook to e2, and then after rook back to b7, just kind of a useless move, he just goes e4, and then I resign here because he's just got too many threats. He's threatening e3, which is pretty decisive, and then if I were to take, then he would have a mate. So after e3, I'm just getting crushed. So I threw in the towel here, but it was really a instructive game, particularly about hanging pawns and learning about how a pawn structure like that can be taken advantage of so easily by just trading pieces into an endgame. He really, it was very instructive how he simply blockaded these pawns and then was able to just grind me down. It's incredible to me how like a position like this is so winning for black, even though he's not necessarily up material yet. And I had a few inaccuracies, but I think I held my own for quite a while. The engine is saying that I played with 87% accuracy, which really isn't too bad. I had a couple inaccuracies, but I'm not perfect. And he had 96% accuracy, which is pretty incredible. But overall, I thought it was a pretty instructive game, and it's always cool to play someone that strong, and this is the strongest player I've ever played. So it was really a great opportunity, and just it was a great game, very instructive, and I'm glad that I was able to play this game, and glad I was able to share it with you guys. And that's all, and I'll see you guys next time.